the Moscow student murders in Idaho. Welcome to Horror Stories Hub. Tonight, we won't be talking about ghosts or haunted houses. Instead, we're diving into the most authentic kind of horror, where the line between sanity and madness becomes blurred. We're traveling to the state of Idaho, where a brutal murder case has shaken the entire United States. In the early hours of November 13th, 2022, 4 college students were brutally murdered with a knife in their own home in Moscow. The case was shocking not only for its unprecedented cruelty, but also for its terrifying mystery. Who did this? What was the motive? And why was one housemate, Dylan Mortensen, able to survive just feet away from the killer? For a long time, this case was an unsolved puzzle, until police arrested Bryan Kohberger, a PhD student in criminology. He looked like any other student, but what was revealed afterward turned this case into a real-life horror story. The DNA evidence on the knife sheath, his online searches for serial killers, and even the self-satisfied selfies police found on his phone. However, the story doesn't end there. Recently, on July 23, 2025, Kohberger pleaded not guilty to all charges in court, but the developments that followed were even more terrifying. New investigative documents were leaked, revealing his frightening psychological profile and obsessive behavior before the crime. The public was shocked once again when videos from prison showed him requesting an interview. And most recently, a plea deal was announced in which he admitted to having known the victims' names. However, there is one thing that news reports and television broadcasts can't tell you. That is what truly happened inside the mind of Bryan Kohberger. The conversation between him and himself. What obsession drove him to commit this crime? And tonight, we will hear it from him, from the perspective of the predator. This is not a story for entertainment. This is a journey into the deepest recesses of a madman's soul.
I know I was there! I know exactly! That night, there was nothing but the sound of rain and a terrifying silence. The rain hitting the windshield, one drop, then another like a countdown. I turned off my phone, carefully little by little, and parked a few hundred feet away. I saw their smiles, their warm lights from their house. In a normal world, that would just be a Saturday night scene. But to me, it was an invitation. I had been watching them, not for a day, not for a week, but for months. I knew their schedules. I knew who was doing what. It was part of my research. Research on predators. I wanted to understand why they did it. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized I wasn't just researching. I was learning. And then I found myself standing in front of that house with a motivation I couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was an urge to become alive. I know. People talk about this Elvis. They call me American Psycho. They laugh at me. They don't understand. When I got out of that car on that fateful morning, I felt liberated. All the lectures, all the books I had read, all the theories of criminology, all became meaningless. There was only one single truth. I acted, and after everything was over, I looked in the rearview mirror of my car. I saw a different man. Not a student, not a widow, but a man who had crossed the line. That face, that wasn't self, it was serenity. An absolute serenity after having done something that no one else could. And then I left. I drove away. I went very far. People say I was fleeing, but no. I was driving to search for the peace I had found in that moment. I knew I would be caught. I knew I couldn't run forever, but I wasn't scared. Everything had been arranged like the final chapter in a book, and I was the author. I know they found my DNA. They found my Google searches. They found the photos. They found it all. But they'll never find this. What's happening inside my head. And that's what's most important. This is not a story about what I did. This is a story about what I became. It's time to start this story. Not from the end, but from the very beginning. From a normal life, a life you would never have guessed could become so terrifying. People always ask, why did you do it? But no one ever asks, how did you live before you became this? They just want a simple story about a killer. A story with a beginning and an end. But my life isn't a detective novel. It's a scientific report with dry data, empty charts, and an endless sense of loneliness. My life, before everything exploded, was truly a false calm. A perfect play, and I was the lead actor. I is Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD student at Washington State University. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? But the reality was a series of boring, repetitive days. Every morning, I woke up at the same time, brewed a cup of coffee, sat in front of the computer, reading documents about cases, about criminal psychology. I read about Ted Bundy, about Jeffrey Dahmer, about all those people society calls monsters. I analyzed their behavior, trying to find a pattern, an explanation. I thought that if I understood them, I would understand myself. My colleagues called me a brilliant student, someone with great potential. They didn't know that inside me. There was a huge, unfillable void. I had no close friends. My relationships only existed on the pages of books. I felt like an alien, observing humanity and trying to pretend to be one of them. I smiled when they smiled, nodded when they talked. But inside, I was always analyzing, always evaluating. How many friends did they have? Where did they hang out? What were their hobbies? It was all just data, nothing more. And I had a car, a white Hyundai Elantra. It wasn't just a means of transport. It was my fortress, the only place I felt safe. After classes, I would often drive around the town of Moscow with no specific destination. I just drove. Every street Every corner, every house became familiar. I saw students laughing, going out, enjoying their lives. I looked at them, and a strange feeling crept into me. It wasn't envy. It was a yearning to belong, but at the same time, it was contempt. Why did happiness come so early to them? While I, Bryan Kohberger, had to struggle for every breath, I spent hours driving and listening to podcasts about unsolved cases. The Zodiac Killer case, the Ramsey case. I was obsessed with their mystery, with the fact that a criminal could escape, becoming a legend. I admired their intelligence, their ability to control the game. And I thought, could it all just be a game? Could it be that with a little courage, a little learning, you could become a part of history, an immortal, my family? They also believed in that false calm. They thought I was on the right track, with a brilliant future. They were proud of me. They didn't know that every night I stayed up late reading the most horrifying case files. They didn't know that I had mapped out houses and roads. They didn't know that on those aimless drives, I was searching for something to satisfy my yearning. That was my life. A cycle of loneliness, dry research, and aimless journeys. I lived like a shadow. And those students, they lived in the spotlight. They didn't know that the shadow was watching them. They didn't know that their peaceful play was about to end. And I, Bryan Kohberger, would be the one to pull the curtain down. With each passing day, the distance between me and the predators in the books narrowed. I no longer read books to research. I read to find a path that I believed would lead me to a more meaningful life. A life with a purpose. A life that others would have to talk about. That was the false calm. A calm built on loneliness, yearning, and secrets. And all it would take was one tiny crack for everything to collapse. Everything began not with a grand action, but with a very small change. Like the first crack of a pane of glass. Initially, I tried to ignore it, to rationalize it, but day by day, that crack grew larger, and I realized it wasn't the outside world that was changing, but me. One night in late October, I was driving as usual. I passed by the house on King Road. The lights were off. Music was playing. I saw a group of students laughing on the balcony. Everything seemed normal. But then, I felt a jolt run down my spine. A strange, unfamiliar feeling. Not fear, but a sense of connection. For the first time, I felt I was no longer an observer. I was a part of that story. From that night on, my drives had a purpose. I no longer drove aimlessly. I drove to King Road. I would park a short distance away, sit in the darkness, and watch. At first, it was only 5 minutes, then 10, then an entire hour. I didn't know what I was looking for. Perhaps a sign, perhaps an invitation, or perhaps I just wanted to watch them live. I began to notice small details. The white car parked in front of the house. The doorbell ringing late at night. A door opening. A strange face. Every small detail was a piece in a bigger puzzle. Primero, I told myself, this is just part of my research. This is field investigation for my dissertation. But I knew it was a lie. My dissertation was a shield to hide a much darker truth. One night, I tried to get closer. I walked slowly along the sidewalk, like a normal passerby. My heart was pounding. I felt every cell in my body coming alive. I saw the photos they posted on Instagram, smiling together, and I thought, do they know? Do they know? They're just a few feet away. There's a man who has spent months studying them, studying killers, and studying death. The feeling was overwhelming. It wasn't guilt. It was a sense of power. I knew things they didn't. I had a secret, and that secret created a huge chasm between me and the rest of the world. That chasm wasn't loneliness anymore. It was control. On another night, I parked right in front of the house. I sat there, staring at the house and thinking, would anyone see me? Would anyone call the police? I waited, but nothing happened. People were too busy with their lives, too busy with their texts, their photos, their parties. They never see the shadows. They never see the one standing outside. That was the moment the crack became a vision. I no longer tried to rationalize my action. I no longer pretended this was just research. Instead, I began to accept it, to accept the truth that I was obsessed with their lives, obsessed with the contrast between their lives and mine. And I began to think about how to close that gap. That's when I started searching for information on how to collect DNA, how to avoid leaving traces. My search keywords were no longer Ted Bundy. They had become more practical, more personal. I started looking for things I never thought I would search for. The issue was no longer about criminology. The issue was about me, about who I was going to become. The feeling was horrifying, but also exhilarating. The exhilaration of a person who has found a purpose. I had lived in the shadows for too long, and now I had a chance to step into the light. Not the light of fame, but the light of truth. The truth about what I was capable of. The truth about what I could become. Every trip to King Road was a step into a new world. A world where I was no longer a lonely PhD student. A world where I was a predator and my prey. They were right in front of me. They had no idea. And then the crack became a deep hole. And I was ready to jump. The crack had become a deep hole, and I had jumped in. There was no hesitation, no regret, only a chilling clarity. I was no longer a grad student. I was a predator, and my game had begun. I started to change The trips to King Road were no longer aimless drives. They were patrols. I memorized every schedule, every one of their habits. I knew that on Fridays they would have a party. I knew that in the morning one person would usually go for a run. I knew that at night a certain door was often unlocked. This information was no longer scientific data. It was a weapon. I began to feel an urge to act. That urge wasn't just a thought. It was a hunger that needed to be satisfied. I felt obsessed with the idea of entering that house, not to harm them immediately, but to, fili Italiano, to breathe their air, to touch their things. I remember one night I parked nearby. I got out of the car. For the first time, I was wearing a glove. I walked onto the sidewalk. With every step, I could hear my heart pounding. I passed the balcony. A jacket was thrown on a chair. I wanted to pick it up. I wanted to know what they felt like. But I held back. I couldn't do it. Not yet. I tried to seek help, but failed. But I wasn't looking for help from people. I was looking for help from others like me. I reread old case files, not for research, but for inspiration. I read about how to avoid detection, about the right tools. I found myself sinking deeper into a world I had only ever studied from a distance. My isolation was no longer a sadness. It was an advantage. No one cared about Bryan Kohberger. No one asked where I was. No one knew what I was doing. I was a ghost in this town. A ghost who could go anywhere. Do anything. That feeling. That was power. The power of invisibility. And then I got a call. Not from a friend, but from myself. From a voice in my head told me that time had come. It was no longer time to hide. Time was up. It was time to act. I no longer drove aimlessly around King Road. I drove straight there, parked right in front of the house. I sat in a car, looked at the house, and everything was silent. It was a Saturday night, but there was no music, no laughter. Only a red Jeep and a white sedan parked outside, and a terrifying silence. I knew there were 4 people inside. 4 lives. 4 stories. And I was going to be the one to write their final chapter. The hunger in me was no longer a hunger. It was an unshakable determination. I got out of the car. I opened the trunk. I took out something I had prepared a long time ago. A knife. Not a kitchen knife, but a knife I had researched carefully. A knife I had searched for online to find out how it could create the most fatal wounds. I walked up the steps. My feet made no sound. My hands didn't tremble. I felt like I was in the right place at the right time. My life had led me here. All the years of loneliness, all the research, all the aimless drives, they were all preparations for this very moment. I looked at the house. I saw a curtain move slightly. Did anyone see me? Was anyone looking out? A fleeting moment of panic passed through me, but it vanished instantly. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care about getting caught. I didn't care about the consequences. I only cared about satisfying my hunger. And then I raised my hand. I knocked on the door, and the door opened. The door opened. There was no light. Only a silent shadow stood still. Not a word. Not a sound. In that moment, time seemed to stop. My heart, after a month of erratic pounding, suddenly became strangely calm. This was it. The moment I had prepared my entire life for. I stepped inside. I knew exactly where I was going. I mapped this house out in my mind hundreds of times. The entrance, the stairs, the bedrooms. It was all as clear as the palm of my hand. The shadow retreated, and I went straight for the stairs. My feet made no sound. Step by step, I ascended, like a predator entering its territory. I reached the top floor. The laughter had died. The music was silent. All that remained was the wind whistling through a window crack and the falling rain. I stopped in front of the first door. I knew who was in there! Kaylee Goncalves, she and Morgan. Two best friends. They were asleep. Their relationship, their smiles on Instagram, it had all haunted me. And now, here I was. I pushed the door. Not a sound. The door opened, and I saw two figures on the bed. A white blanket! Moonlight streamed in from the window. I couldn't see their faces, but I saw their peace. A peace I had never known. And I knew I couldn't let that peace exist. I lunged. There was no thought, only instinct. The knife in my hand. It was like an extension of my own body. Cold, sharp, one strike after another. I didn't hear the screams. I only heard my own heart pounding. Fast, fast. I felt a strange sense of release. Little by little, I felt the void inside me being filled. Another person woke up. I heard a terrified shriek. The sound of frantic footsteps in the hallway. No, no. No, no. This wasn't the plan. The plan was to be silent, to be perfect. But perfection only exists in theory. In reality, there is chaos. And I had to control that chaos. Primera turn. I saw Shana Konodol. She was standing right outside her room door, her eyes wide with terror. For a moment, I looked into those eyes. I saw horror, disbelief. She didn't understand. She didn't know why. And I knew I had no time to explain. She backed away, hitting the refrigerator. A loud crash. Ethan Chapin, her boyfriend, was running towards her. They were together, like a bond I never had. A cold fury flared within me. No! You can't have that happiness! Not when I've spent my entire life searching for it. I rushed towards them. Two people. Two targets! I acted quickly. Oh! Quickly! Urgently! There was no romanticization. only brutality. Each strike was an explanation for all my lonely nights, for all the hours I sat in my car just to watch them live. The feeling, it was strange. It was like I was outside my own body. I saw myself acting. I heard the chaotic sounds, but I felt nothing. No fear, no regret. Only a singular focus. Complete the mission! Then I turned back to the stairs. The initial plan was to have no witnesses. The plan was perfect, but I had left one person behind. One person who could see me. One person I couldn't rationalize. I ran down the stairs, quickly, silently. I saw a door open. A figure stood there. Dylan Mortensen. She had woken up. She had heard everything. And now she was standing there, looking right at me. In that moment, my entire world collapsed. All the theories, all the plans shut down. She was looking at me. Her eyes weren't just horror. Her eyes were empty, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had seen me. I knew it. Her gaze didn't leave me, and neither did mine. We stood there. Two people, two worlds. Predator and prey. But there was no action. Only a maddening silence. What could I do? I could kill her. One more strike. Just one more strike. Everything would be over. There would be no witness. No one would know. But I didn't. A part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime studying crime, spoke up. No, this is no longer a perfect case. Killing her would make me just like the others. The killers who act out of panic. I am not one of them. Primera ba, kid, how I slowly. My eyes never left hers. Her eyes never left mine. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there, motionless, like a frozen deer. I turned, ran out the door. The cold wind rushed in. The rain was still falling. I felt every drop on my face. A chilling cold, but not as cold as the truth I had just faced. I ran towards my car. First I got in. Started the engine. Drove Hawaii around King Road. One more time. And another time. With no purpose. Only habit. And then I stopped the car. I took out my phone, opened the front camera. I looked at my face. I saw empty eyes. A twisted smile. A smile not of happiness, but of release. Release from a meaningless life. And then I took the photo. One picture, two pictures, three pictures. The pictures they would find later. The pictures they would call sick, but they don't understand. That picture is my confession. It's the proof of my existence. I lived. I acted. and I became a part of history. After he left, everything was silent. The chaos had ended. The rain was still falling. The streets were empty. There were no police sirens, no screams. There was only me, alone in my car, and an unbelievable sense of peace. I drove all night, crossed state lines, returned to my parents' house. I knew where I was going, like a wounded animal returning to its den. I wasn't wounded. Primera, hawa, ese, heal the next morning. When he woke up, the world still turned. Coffee was still hot. Breakfast was still served. Life went on as usual. No one knew what had happened. And that was such a special feeling. I turned on the TV. The news was exploding. 4 college students found dead. Horrific murders in Moscow, Idaho. I watched the words scroll across the screen, looked at their faces, now public on TV. I saw them laughing. I saw their friends cry. And I, Bryan Kohberger, sat there drinking coffee and watching. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. Only a strange void, like a hunger that had been satisfied. And then there was nothing left. I became part of the investigation, but only from a distance. I followed every press conference, every interview, every theory from the experts. I chuckled to myself when they came up with absurd speculations they couldn't possibly understand. They were trying to apply their theories to something that had no theory. Something that was purely instinct. I saw them talk about DNA. I saw them talk about the white Hyundai. I knew those were my clues. Those were the traces I had left for them. Not because I was careless, but because I wanted them to find me. I wanted them to find me. I wanted the game to continue. The initial piece began to crack. Not with madness, but with the pressure of waiting. I lived in a state of constant tension. A tension I had learned to love. Every time the doorbell rang, every time the phone buzzed, I would ask myself, is it now? Has the time come? I lived with a strange exhilaration, the exhilaration of someone who knows that one day they will be caught. I started to feel watched, not by people, but by my own cry. The images, the sounds of that night kept coming back to me. I saw Dylan Mortensen's eyes, those empty and disbelief-filled eyes. She was the only one who saw me. She was the only witness. And she said nothing. She was a mystery. That mystery haunted me. I did all this to become special. And now I am the most special person, but the price to pay is loneliness. I can't tell anyone. I can't share my triumph. I can only sit here and wait for my turn. December 21st. I was driving home. A police car followed me. I knew they had finally arrived. I didn't panic. I didn't try to escape. I calmly drove home like an obedient student. Opened the car door. Waited. They approached. The flashing lights. The sound of the police siren. Their serious faces. They told me they had their warrant from IRS. A host smiled a genuine smile, not the six Somali saw in the photos, but a smile of liberation. I had completed my mission. I had lived. I had acted. And now I had become a part of history. They will write books about me. They will make movies about me. And I will never be forgotten. That was the aftermath. Not punishment, but validation.
We have just listened to the story of Bryan Kohberger, not through the words of investigators or the media, but from his very own mind. This is a chilling reminder that horror does not always come from ghosts or ancient curses. Sometimes it is simply a small crack in a person's soul, which slowly spreads into an abyss. The story of the Moscow, Idaho murders is not just a criminal case. It is a deep look into the loneliness, obsession, and desperate need for recognition of a madman. Bryan Kohberger became what he had been studying for so long. He turned himself into a criminal legend, an immortal in the dark history of America. And in his strange serenity, we find a new fear. The fear of what lurks within seemingly ordinary people in the most peaceful of places. The testimony of Dylan Mortensen, the sole survivor, remains a mystery. Why didn't she scream? Why didn't she run? Perhaps the sheer moment of facing pure horror froze her, a reaction that science cannot explain. Or perhaps her silence was what gave Kohberger a moment of doubt. Whatever the reason, her survival is a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there is a glimmer of life. This case, with all its complexity and terror, has concluded with an answer. But the haunting remains. It still hangs in the air of Moscow and in the minds of all who have listened. Thank you for listening to this special episode of Horror Stories Hub. If you were captivated and intrigued by these true horror stories, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next tales. Leave a comment below and let us know which U.S. state you want to hear a true horror story from in our next episode. Be careful what you look for. It might just find you.